The Unlock system is JGB's lab methodology for serious musicians working with AI tools. Lean to work, human authored, AI assisted music creation. And if you'd rather have me apply it directly to your music, I master AI tracks and review them too. More on that as we go. Hello, and welcome to the AI Music Revolution. I am your host, Josh Gilliland, the founder of JGB's Lab. So I get some version of this question often, and I've been getting it a lot more recently. So somebody will finish a song in their AI platform, Suno, Mureka, 11 Labs, fill in the blank, whatever they're using. And it sounds good in their headphones. And so then they ask me, Josh, do I really need to master this? Well, the short answer, yes. And today I want to actually explain why. In plain language, no jargon you have to already know to follow along. I want to explain what mastering actually is, what the pieces of it are, why it matters for any song, and then the part that I think about the most given the business that I'm in, and why it's not just important, but genuinely necessary for AI generated music specifically, in a way that isn't for a band that tracked everything in a live room. Okay, so let's get into it. Let's actually start from ground zero. What is mastering? So you'll hear mixing and mastering. They get talked about like they're the same job, and they're truly not the same job. So mixing is what happens inside of a song. This is things like balancing the vocal against the guitar and then against the drums and making sure that nothing is fighting for the same space. Mastering happens after that's done. It's the last pass on the finished stereo file. It's the one step between this sounds like a song and this sounds like it belongs on the radio next to everything else that is on the radio. So think of it like this. Mixing is arranging the furniture in a room. Mastering is turning on the lights and making sure that the room looks right whether someone walks in during the day or at night. Same room, but it has to hold up under different conditions. And that's actually the job. Not making something louder, not a filter you run at the end. You are making sure that the song translates. Car speakers, earbuds, a laptop, a proper studio monitor, all of them. So let's talk about the toolkit. And again, plain language. There's really only a handful of tools involved in the mastering process. And honestly, none of them are exotic. So you deal with EQ, the equalization. You're adjusting how loud different frequencies are, bass versus mid-range versus treble. If a mix feels muddy, that's usually too much energy piled up on the low side. If it feels harsh, that's usually too much stacked up on the high side. EQ is just turning specific knobs up or down in the frequency range, not the whole volume, just a slice of it. And compression. This one trips people up probably the most. So here's a real simple version of what compression is. Compression makes the quiet parts and the loud parts of a song sit closer together. So without compression, a vocal that kind of whispers in a voice or in the verse and then screams in the chorus can be genuinely heard, or it can be hard to mix at one volume. There, got it out. You're either turning it up for the quiet parts or you're getting blasted out in the loud parts. So compression narrows that gap So the whole thing sits at a more consistent and controllable level. Limiting. A limiter is really just a very aggressive compressor with one prevailing job: stop anything from crossing a hard ceiling. It's the last line of defense against clipping and distortion. It's also usually the stage that raises the overall loudness of the finished track, because once nothing can go over the ceiling, you can push everything else up closer to it. Then there's the stuff that you actually measure, not the stuff that you turn. These aren't the nerd knobs, these are the actual measurements of it all. So LUFS. LUFS is loudness, specifically how loud a track is perceived to be, not just how loud it reads on a peak meter. This is the number streaming platforms actually care about, because Spotify and Apple Music and YouTube, they all normalize loudness, meaning if your song is louder than their target, they'll just turn it back down on playback. So chasing loudness past a certain point doesn't even work anymore. It just costs you dynamics in the song for nothing. True peak. Now that's a little different from a normal peak reading. A normal peak meter looks at the actual samples in the file. True peak estimates what happens after that file gets converted back into analog in your speakers or headphones, where a brief overshoot can sneak in between samples that the file itself never technically shows. So staying safely under true peak is what keeps a master from distorting on playback, even when the file itself looks very clean on paper. And the loudness range, the LRA, it's just a way of measuring how much a song moves between its quietest parts and its loudest moments. So some songs want a real tight, dense LRA, but then you have other songs, the ones that are built on contrast and dynamics, they want a lot of room to breathe, and neither is automatically right. It depends on what the song is actually trying to do. So that's the whole toolkit. EQ shapes tone, compression controls dynamics, limiting protects the ceiling. LUFS, true peak, and LRA are how you measure whether all of that actually works or not. So why does this matter for any song? Okay, so every song, I don't care if it's made by AI or humans in a room, benefits from mastering for the same basic reason. A song doesn't exist in isolation. It exists sitting right next to every other song a listener hears that day, on a playlist, on the radio, or in their queue. If your song sounds thinner or quieter or rougher than what's playing right before and right after it, a listener doesn't consciously think, this wasn't mastered, or this wasn't mastered very well. They just think, this doesn't sound as good. And then they move on without ever knowing why. Mastering is what keeps a song from losing that comparison before anyone's even judged the songwriting. And this is why it's not optional for AI-generated music specifically. So this is the part that I actually want to spend the most time on, because this is where it stops being a nice to have and it becomes something closer to a necessity. So first, let's talk about artifacts. So when a track comes straight out of Suno or Mureka or whatever engine you're using, it's not a mix in the traditional sense. It's a generation. And generation models have a signature, a set of things that they consistently get slightly wrong. I hear it constantly. Energy piles into the low mids without real definition underneath it. So a track can sound full and thin at the same time. The top end gets restrained in a way that quietly hides artifacts in the cymbals and vocal air. So it sounds okay at low volumes and starts sounding very strange the moment you turn it up. And loudness that reads fine on a meter often plays thin the moment it hits real speakers at normal volume. None of that means the song is bad, though. It just means what came out of the platform is raw material, not a finished master. And raw material from a generation model has different problems than raw material from a band that tracked live in a room. Second, in this one people I don't really think that they think about it until I explain it, and that's stems. So if you pull stems out of an AI generation, whether the platform gives them to you directly or you run a separate stem extraction tool, those stems were never actually separate to begin with. A real drum kit and a real guitar amp in a room are physically isolated instruments, captured on separate microphones, often at separate times. AI-generated stems are a reconstruction, an estimate of what each instrument's parts probably sounds like, pulled out of one blended signal. So what this means, that means bleed that shouldn't exist, phase relationships that don't quite line up the way real recorded instruments do, and small seams where the separation process gets wrong. A mastering pass has to listen for that specifically and smooth over it. The same way you'd correct for a real recording problem, except this is a different kind of problem, one that's unique to how the audio was made in the first place when it comes to AI music. So put those two things together and you get the actual argument for why mastering matters more here, not less. A traditionally recorded song usually arrives at mastering already musically coherent. The problems left to solve are mostly tonal polish. An AI-generated song arrives with real, specific, repeatable issues baked into how it was made. Mastering isn't finishing touches at that point. It's the difference between raw output and an actual finished track or record. And I want to be very straight about what this is not. This is not about tricking a platform or getting past some AI detection system. Mastering changes how a track sounds. It doesn't change what it is. The whole reason I do this the way that I do is honestly about the process, not about getting around it. So if you take one thing from this episode, take this. If a song came out of Suno or Mureka and you're about to release it straight from your export, you're releasing raw material, not a finished master. You don't have to hire anyone to fix that. You can learn the actual chain yourself. That's the whole reason I wrote Unlock Reaper. Or you hand it to someone who spent real hours specifically inside of this problem. Either path works. The only wrong move is releasing something unfinished next to everything else it's about to be judged beside. Thank you for listening. I look forward to chatting with you next week. Every Thursday morning, I send out a newsletter, one email a week, what I'm working on in the studio, the research running in the lab. Sign up at jgbslab.com/newsletter. And if you want a track reviewed or mastered directly, that's in the show notes below. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next Friday.